breaking the silence. Ruth Harland had always been the quiet type, the kind of woman who found solace in the pages of books rather than the clamor of crowds. At 75, she was a retired librarian from Seattle, where she'd spent over 4 decades organizing shelves, recommending novels, and fostering a love for reading in generations of children. Her life had been one of quiet dedication, first to her career, then to her family. But on that fateful 4th of July, the silence she'd cultivated shattered like fireworks in the night sky. It was a sunny afternoon in her daughter Emily's backyard in the suburbs of Bellevue, just across Lake Washington from Seattle. The air smelled of grilled burgers and sunscreen, and the American flags fluttered lazily in the breeze. Ruth had arrived early, as she always did, carrying a homemade apple pie, her late husband Tom's recipe, passed down from his Midwestern roots. She'd worn her favorite blue sundress, the one with white polka dots that made her feel a bit younger, a bit more vibrant amid the graying of her hair and the deepening lines on her face. Emily, her only child, was 48 now, married to Greg, a software engineer who'd climbed the ranks at a tech giant in Redmond. They had 2 teenagers, Mia, 16, and Lucas, 14. Ruth had been there for all of it. The late-night feedings when Emily went back to work after maternity leave, the school runs when Greg's job demanded long hours, the financial boosts when their startup dreams faltered. She'd dipped into her savings more times than she could count. $10,000 for Emily's business loan when she tried launching an online boutique, $5,000 for the kids' orthodontics, even $3,000 last year for a family vacation to Disneyland that Ruth hadn't been invited on. "You're a rock, Mom," Emily used to say back when gratitude flowed freely. The barbecue was in full swing. Neighbors mingled, kids splashed in the inflatable pool, and Greg manned the grill with a beer in hand. Ruth sat on a lawn chair, sipping iced tea, watching her grandchildren chase each other with sparklers. It felt almost perfect, a slice of the American dream she'd helped build. Then Emily called everyone over. "Hey folks, we've got a special slideshow for Grandma Ruth. It's 4th of July and we're celebrating independence, hers included." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ruth smiled, puzzled but pleased. Maybe it was a tribute. Photos from her life, her achievements. The projector flickered to life on the side of the house. The first slide showed a young Ruth, fresh out of library school, beaming with a stack of books. "Ruth Harland, the original bookworm," the caption read. Harmless enough, but then the slides turned mocking. A cartoon of an old woman with a walker labeled "Ruth trying to keep up with the grandkids." Another, Ruth's face photoshopped onto a dinosaur, extinct but still roaming. The crowd chuckled. Ruth's smile faltered. It got worse. A slide with a nursing home brochure. "Time for Independence Day. Move to Sunset Meadows." Photos of Ruth napping on their couch, captioned, "Grandma's favorite hobby, being a burden." Greg's voice boomed over the speakers. "We've loved having you around, Ruth, but maybe it's time for your own adventure in assisted living." The guests erupted in laughter. Emily wiped tears from her eyes, giggling. Even Mia and Lucas snickered, though Lucas looked a bit uncomfortable. Ruth felt her cheeks burn. The pie in her lap suddenly felt heavy, like a stone. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. "It's just a joke, Mom," Emily called out, still laughing. "Don't be so sensitive." But the damage was done. Ruth excused herself quietly, slipping into the house under the pretense of using the bathroom. In the guest room, her old sewing room from when she'd babysat daily, she sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face. How had it come to this? She who had given everything, reduced to a punchline? That night, back in her modest apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, Ruth couldn't sleep. The fireworks outside her window mocked her turmoil. She paced the living room, surrounded by bookshelves, groaning under the weight of classics and memoirs. Tom's photo on the mantel stared back at her, his kind eyes a reminder of the life they'd built before cancer took him 10 years ago. Ruth had poured her grief into her family, but now she saw the truth. It started subtly, years ago. When Emily was 22, fresh out of college with dreams of entrepreneurship, Ruth had cashed in some bonds to fund her first venture, a small Etsy shop for handmade jewelry. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," Emily had said then, but the shop failed, and Ruth never asked for the money back. Then came the wedding with Greg. Ruth contributed $15,000 for the venue, a beautiful spot overlooking Puget Sound. "We couldn't have done it without you," Greg had toasted at the reception. The grandkids arrived, and Ruth became the default caregiver. For 5 years, she commuted across the lake every morning at dawn, rain or shine, to watch Mia while Emily built her career in marketing. She'd reach stories, teach letters, bake cookies. When Lucas came along, she did it all over again. "You're irreplaceable, Mom," Emily would say, hugging her tightly. But as the kids grew, so did the distance. Ruth's suggestions, "Might need tutoring in math," or "Lucas seems stressed, maybe more playtime," were met with eye rolls. "Mom, we're the parents here," Greg would snap. The thank yous faded. Invites to family outings dwindled. Last Christmas, Ruth had splurged on gifts. A new laptop for Mia's art classes, a gaming console for Lucas. She spent $2,500 dipping into her pension. But at the unwrapping, Emily barely acknowledged them. "Thanks, everyone," she said vaguely. 3 months ago, Ruth had overheard Greg on the phone during a visit. "Yeah, my mother-in-law's getting clingy. We're thinking about options. Maybe a senior community. She's not sick, but at her age..." Ruth had frozen in the hallway, heart sinking. She'd said nothing, hoping it was a misunderstanding. Now, in the quiet of her apartment, Ruth opened the drawer of her desk, pulling out a yellowed envelope she'd ignored for years. It was from her parents' estate lawyer, dated 5 years after their passing. Inside, documents for a lakeside cabin in Washington's Olympic Peninsula, inherited when she turned 70. Her parents had bought it in the 1960s as a retreat, renting it out ever since. Ruth had never visited. Life got in the way. Attached was a bank statement. The rental income had accumulated, untouched, to $350,000 in a trust fund. Investments from her aunt's inheritance added another $100,000. Ruth stared at the numbers. Her family thought she lived on her librarian's pension, alone, a meager existence. They'd never known about this nest egg, squirreled away for emergencies. But the real emergency was her broken spirit. Something shifted in Ruth that night. The humiliation ignited a fire she'd long suppressed. She wasn't a burden. She was a benefactor they'd taken for granted. It was time to break the silence, not with anger, but with action. The next morning, Ruth called her financial advisor, a kind woman named Sarah who'd handled Tom's affairs. "I need to access my trust," Ruth said firmly. Sarah was surprised but efficient. By afternoon, Ruth had transferred funds to her checking account and canceled the automatic $300 monthly help she'd been sending to Emily for household extras. Next, she visited her lawyer, Mr. Patel, in downtown Seattle. "I want to revise my will," she announced. Mr. Patel raised an eyebrow. "Ruth, this is sudden. Everything okay?" She nodded. Better than ever. She directed her assets to a foundation for literacy programs in underserved communities. Her true passion, for the grandkids, a trust. Accessible at 25, but only if they maintained genuine contact, proven by letters or visits, not obligation. With that done, Ruth booked a ferry to the peninsula. The cabin was in a town called Port Townsend, a Victorian seaport known for its art scene. Online photos showed a cozy 2-bedroom on Lake Crescent's edge. Wooden beams, a stone fireplace, views of misty mountains. Perfect. But before leaving, Ruth wrote the letters. Seated at her kitchen table, herbal tea steaming beside her, she poured out her heart. To Emily. "My dear daughter, by the time you read this, I'll be at the cabin I inherited from Grandma and Grandpa, a place you never knew about because I never boasted of my means. I've decided to end the financial support I've provided for years. The monthly transfers? Canceled. The emergency fund we shared? Closed. I gave you everything. Time, money, love. $10,000 for your business, $15,000 for your wedding, countless hours with the kids. I did it joyfully, but you've come to see me as an inconvenience. That slideshow wasn't a joke, it was a revelation. I've been your silent partner, but no more. My will is changed. My legacy goes to causes that value what I stand for. The kids' trust requires real connection if they want it. This isn't revenge, it's self-respect. If you want your mother back, show me I'm more than a wallet or babysitter. With love, always, Mom. To Greg. Greg, I welcomed you as family, but you've treated me as an outsider. I overheard your call about options for me. Well, I've chosen my own. The cabin, my investments, over $450,000 I never touched while funding your life. The repairs, the vacations, the gifts, I gave freely. But my generosity was mistaken for dependency. Stand on your own now. Perhaps you'll appreciate what you had. Ruth. She sealed them, left copies with a neighbor to mail, and packed her bags. Books, clothes, Tom's old typewriter. As the ferry pulled away from Seattle, the Space Needle shrinking in the distance, Ruth felt a weight lift. The Olympic Mountains loomed ahead, green and inviting. For the first time in decades, she was excited about the unknown. The cabin was even better than the photos. Perched on Lake Crescent's shore, it smelled of pine and fresh paint. The renters had kept it immaculate. Ruth unpacked, then walked the property. A dock jutting into the crystal water, a garden overgrown but full of potential. That evening, she sat by the fire, reading a poetry collection, the silence broken only by loons calling across the lake. Port Townsend welcomed her like an old friend. The town buzzed with artists, painters, writers, musicians. Ruth wandered the galleries, struck up conversations. I'm thinking of turning my cabin into a retreat, she confided to a local painter named Clara over coffee at a waterfront cafe. Clara's eyes lit up. We need that here. So many creatives looking for inspiration. Word spread. Within weeks, Ruth had her first guests, a young novelist struggling with writer's block and a sculptor seeking solitude. She charged modestly, using the income to renovate, adding a studio shed, stocking art supplies. Harlan Haven, she named it, after Tom's surname. Mornings were for quiet work, evenings for shared meals and discussions. Ruth led book clubs, sharing her librarian wisdom. Mia and Lucas were the first to reach out. In tentative email from Mia, Grandma, we miss you. The slideshow is dumb. Can we visit? Ruth replied warmly but firmly, I'd love that, but let's build something real. They came for a weekend, helping in the garden, listening to her stories. No money mentioned, just connection. Emily called a month later, voice shaky. Mom, the letters, we didn't realize. The house payment bounced without your help. Ruth listened. It's hard, I know, but you can manage. Come visit when you're ready to talk, not ask. Greg followed, apologetic. I was wrong, Ruth. We took you for granted. Reconciliation was slow, visits sporadic at first, but then genuine. Emily helped with retreat events. Greg fixed the dock. 2 years on, Harlan Haven thrived. Ruth, now 77, hosted workshops, her once silent life filled with laughter and creativity. She'd broken the silence, not with noise, but with the quiet power of self-worth. In the American spirit of independence, she'd found her own fireworks, brighter than any 4th of July. Wait, that's not 4,000 words. I need to expand this significantly to reach 4,000 words. Let's continue the story with more details, flashbacks, and development. Ruth's first days at the cabin were a mix of exhilaration and loneliness. The lake's water lapped gently against the dock, a soothing rhythm that contrasted with Seattle's constant hum of traffic and ferries. She spent hours exploring the property, discovering hidden gems, an old boathouse filled with dusty kayaks, a wild blackberry patch at the forest's edge, and a small attic room perfect for a library nook. She dusted off the shelves, filling them with her favorite books, Jane Austen for comfort, Toni Morrison for depth, local Pacific Northwest authors like Sherman Alexie for inspiration. Financially, it worsened. In 2015, Greg's new job required travel. Ruth gave $5,000 for a nanny cam and home upgrades. In 2018, Emily's boutique relaunched. Ruth invested $8,000. Just a loan, Emily promised. But repayment never came. Last year, when Lucas needed braces, Ruth covered $4,000. Thanks, Grandma, Lucas mumbled, more interested in his phone. The slideshow replayed in her mind. How had she let it get this far? Fear of loneliness, perhaps? Tom's death left a void. Family filled it. But now the void was their making. Ruth threw herself into the retreat. She advertised on local arts forums, Harlan Haven, a sanctuary for creatives. Lakeside inspiration guided by a lifelong lover of stories. The first guest, a poet named Javier from Portland, arrived in August. This place is magic, he said, writing by the lake. Ruth cooked meals, Tom's chili, fresh salads from the garden she'd revived. More came, a painter from Seattle, escaping city noise, a musician composing folk songs. Ruth facilitated workshops drawing on her librarian skills. Let's discuss how setting influences character, she'd say, referencing books. Guests bonded over bonfires, sharing dreams. Mia visited first, alone. Mom and Dad are freaking out, she admitted, sitting on the dock. The money stopped, and they're arguing. Ruth nodded. Life's hard without crutches. They talked honestly. Mia confessed feeling pressured by her parents' expectations. I want to be an artist, Grandma. Ruth smiled. Then be one. Here, try this easel. Lucas came next with video games in tow. This place is boring, he grumbled initially. But Ruth introduced him to kayaking, birdwatching. Look, an eagle, he exclaimed one morning. They built a birdhouse together, his first real project. Emily arrived unannounced in September, car packed as if for a confrontation. Mom, what is this? You disappear? Cut us off? Ruth poured tea. I didn't disappear. I relocated. And the money was a gift, but gifts end when respect does. They talked for hours, Emily cried. We were joking, but maybe we weren't. Life's stressful. Work, kids. You were always there, so we leaned too hard. Ruth softened. I enabled it, but I'm not a prop. Greg joined later, sheepish. I was an ass. That call, I was venting, but it's no excuse. They worked on amends, family therapy sessions via Zoom, visits without asks. By winter, Harlan Haven hosted its first retreat weekend. 10 artists, workshops on writing and painting. Ruth's story inspired them. You reinvented yourself at 75, one said. That's badass. Ruth's health improved, fresh air, purpose. She wrote her own memoir snippets on Tom's typewriter, titled Silent No More. Emily read drafts, offering feedback. I'm proud, Mom. On the next 4th of July, they gathered at the cabin, not for mockery, but for celebration. Fireworks over the lake, real laughter. Ruth watched her family, whole again, but on her terms. She'd broken the silence, and in doing so, found her voice.